Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to the 22nd DEM I Wonder webinar. DEM has so many services, offerings, programs, and hidden gems that we want to share with all of you, so we're excited to take just a few minutes each week to highlight these features in our weekly webinar. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many exercises have been postponed or canceled. The Utah Division of Emergency Management is hosting this weekly webinar series aimed at providing local emergency managers with relevant content and opportunities to enhance their capabilities. Webinars are live for Q&A and are recorded for later viewing on the DEM website and YouTube channel. Most of these webinars are seminars or workshops with a hands-on portion, which will allow emergency managers to become oriented to a DEM process or test a DEM product. Our schedule today will be as follows. We will start with our ground rules and etiquette. Next, we'll have a brief presentation by Wade Matthews on I Wonder How to Conduct a News Interview. Following the presentation, there will be a hands-on portion where participants will be encouraged to test out the product or process that was presented. Following the hands-on portion of our program, the presenter will be available for a Q&A session. Following the Q&A, we will close with a short message about upcoming webinars. The ground rules today are fairly simple. Please mute your line while the presenter is presenting. If you have a question, you may type it in the group chat or unmute at the appropriate time to ask your question. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. Thank you all for your attendance today. With that, we'll turn the time over to Wade.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And if you'll, yeah, there we go. I'll start presenting my screen. Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here again today to provide this I Wonder webinar on conducting news interviews. Again, we've been doing a few of these, what are basically public information officer trainings at the request of some of our local emergency managers. And you know, a lot of people, whether they have a PIO or not, you know, maybe are doing interviews, called upon to do news interviews, emergency managers, subject matter experts, you know, just public officials in general. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, we obviously have not been able to be providing our basic PIO course for new PIOs throughout the past year around the state. So these slides and this presentation basically are coming from our the FEMA's G290 basic PIO course, as well as the previous I Wonder webinar that I did a few weeks ago on writing a news release. That was also from the FEMA G290 basic PIO course. That's great information. This course is being, I don't know if retired is the right word, Chrissy. Yeah, but basically coming obsolete. They've created a new course that we will be bringing to the state sometime this year, hopefully in the fall, for PIOs as well. So, but anybody can be asked to provide an interview. This isn't just for PIOs. So one of the things we talked about in our previous, you know, writing news releases webinar are the basics of communication. So I'm just going to go over these again really quickly in case we have somebody new here in the audience. But you know, what's our objective in communicating? Why are we communicating? What do we want to do through that communication? Do we want to educate them on a topic? Do we want to persuade them as far as an opinion or support? Or are we calling them to action? Are we asking them to build their disaster supply kit or learn a protective action or whatever? Why are we communicating? Before we even start communicating, we need to answer those questions or answer that question. Why? What's your purpose? That will help you again in making sure that you're communicating effectively. Second, who is the audience? Who are we trying to reach? That's obviously a big factor in knowing how to communicate, being prepared to communicate effectively. What do they already know? What is their perception? How do they receive messages? You know, that can vary from audience to audience. So it's important to know who your audience is and what their understandings are and what information they might be looking for. And then lastly, your message itself. What will you say? What, you know, how will you say it? You know, the words and the medium we'll talk about this coming up in a second too. Is this a written communication? Is it a verbal communication? Is it a, what are you using? What are your tools to communicate and get that message out there? So these are all very important in effective communication, and including providing a news interview. So determining your objective, going back to that top item on the basics. What is your objective? So when a reporter asks you for an interview, your PIO for an interview, who determines the objective? Is it the reporter? They're calling you up. They've got an idea in mind. They may have a specific topic in mind, an incident in mind, questions in mind. So does the reporter determine the objective of this interview? No, you do. The interviewee, the subject matter expert. Yeah, you may agree to provide this news interview, and they're going to come and have their topics and questions in mind, but it's up to you to determine your objective. What are you trying to get out there to the public? What are you trying to convey, your message through this interview? Okay. So you keep in mind that you have control of the objective. You have control of your messages. You have control of what you say, how you say it. Even if the questions aren't the questions you want or were expecting or whatever, you still have control of the objective, of the purpose of that interview. So understanding the audience again. We have the media is only a tool. The news media, doing an interview, that's just a tool in your toolbox for communicating to your audience, the public, the people in the evacuation area, the people in the shelters, the people, whatever audience it is you're trying to reach. The media is just a tool in your tool belt, and not something to be afraid of. There's something to know how to use responsibly, like any other tool. You want to be able to use it responsibly, effectively, without causing harm or injury or damage, but it's just a tool in your toolbox. So don't be afraid of using the media, and in other words, in agreeing to offer an interview. We don't need to avoid interviews. It's a good tool to reach the masses, the mass media. So, but a little bit of homework will help us to know how to use that tool appropriately. So, for example, the reporter. How well does the reporter understand your department or program? I watch a lot of news, and a lot of times you can tell that reporter has no idea what's going on. They just got sent out there to cover a story that just may have been happening. Don't have any background information, any previous knowledge about that agency or what they do, or even the subject matter itself. You can maybe try to educate them before that interview occurs by sending them, hey, let me send you a few fact sheets. Why don't you check out our website and see what we do? And you can give them a little bit of background information to help them understand your department or program better. Do they have a track record that you are aware of? Some reporters can have their reputations that precede them, as they say, whether they're a tough reporter or they are always negative, or they don't get my quotes right, or whatever, something like that. So does this reporter have a track record? That should definitely affect how you approach that interview. In some cases, it may even be appropriate to call up that the news director or whatever from the outlet and say, hey, I'd really love to do that story, but I've had some bad experiences with that reporter in the past. You have another reporter. That's not common. It's not common to do something like that, but if you've got a bad experience, it's not completely uncalled for to maybe make a request like that. Does the reporter have a bias or an agenda? Again, it doesn't mean that's not a reason to maybe ask for another reporter to come and cover this. So a lot of times, and those are times when this is advanced notice. If it's an emergency incident and it's just an incident's just happened and it's breaking news, you've got to deal with whoever shows up. There's no controlling that. You just got to deal with whoever shows up. But in a scheduled interview, these things are good to know in advance. Just be prepared to work with that reporter's bias or agenda the best that you can. So knowing your target audience, do they already have an opinion of your department? Do they see you? Are you the IRS, which everybody sees as negative? Are you, how do they see your agency or department? What kind of feedback have you been getting over social media or from previous news stories? How well does the audience understand the topic that you might be talking about? Do you need to provide a lot of background information and make sure you are not going too much over their heads, with scientific detail and those types of things? What are their perceptions that you might need to address? Because perception is reality. When it comes to the public, perception is reality. So how do we address those perceptions? So for our interview purposes, then again, we need to know all of these things. We're going to focus now on the message, developing the message. This is key to providing a good, successful news interview. So what are you going to say to achieve your objective? And given the audience, what will you say to achieve your objective? So if your audience is, for example, a neighborhood that needs to be evacuated, what are some information you want to make sure that you're saying to help people take the proper protective action to evacuate, to boil water, order, whatever? You need to make sure you're including the threat. Why? The who, what, why, where, when, how. Same things we talked about in writing a news release. You want to probably have those same who, what, why, where, when, how questions answered in providing a news interview. So why will they need to evacuate? Where will they need to go? For how long? What are we doing to mitigate the situation and get it back to normal? So to achieve our objective of getting that audience to take action, to evacuate, go to the shelter, to stay awake until we can get things back to normal, what are we going to say to help them take those actions? So basically knowing the who, what, why, where, when, how. Back to those basics again. Given the medium, and that is referring to, is this a TV interview, a radio interview, a newspaper interview, a social media interview, whatever. Given that medium, how will you convey the message? Newsprint, they want lots of detail. They've got lots of space and columns in their newspapers that they want to fill, and so they need more detail. So having a lot of background information, fact sheets, as much of information as available and releasable about the incident at that time, you want to probably try to be able to provide that. TV and radio, kind of similar broadcast mediums, they like short sound bites, 2 or 3 seconds, pretty brief. If you can get 5, 10, 15-second sound bites on there, you're doing really good. So, but they're going to be very brief, and so you want to make sure you're speaking in concise yet complete sound bites for TV and radio. Don't go on and on and on and on and on, and then they have no idea where to edit and cut that, and they might take it out of context, and they might make more mistakes. So you're trying to speak in short, concise yet complete sound bites for TV and radio. TV also is very visual. Where are you going to be able to provide that interview? Are you able to go into the EOC, your EOC, state, local, whatever EOC, as a backdrop, mobile command vehicle in the background, something like that? You can control visually what's happening around you too, even at a breaking news scene. If there's a lot of death and tragedy in the background, say, no, I cannot, I need to face another direction. That's not going to work. You can kind of control the setting of your news interview locations and surroundings as well. And keep that in mind as far as, TV interviews. They've got their cameras rolling and they can see everything going on in the background as well. So know the medium, again, newspaper, TV, radio, social media, so on, so on. And how does that change how you will convey your message? How are you going to get your message out there? And as Jeff mentioned, if anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt me or put something in the chat window if you've got any questions as we're going through this. So again, preparing for the interview, and this really applies in both cases, the breaking news, and if it's a scheduled, I've got an advance notice interview happening. This applies for both of those situations. It's important that you understand the request, from the reporter, and what kind of interview is this, and is it going to be live? Is it going to be taped and edited later? Again, TV, radio, newspaper. What's your topic? How long? How long of an interview are you expecting? How much time do we have to talk about this? So understanding that request, it's questions you want to ask in advance. If it's not a breaking news story, if it's an advance request, and then anticipate questions that the interviewer might ask, the reporter might ask. Given the situation, what questions are they going to ask you about this evacuation order, about this boil water order? Are they going to ask about the source of the contamination? Are they going to ask about what are we doing to fix the situation? They're definitely going to ask about how long will this take, which a lot of times we don't know the answer to that question, but how long until people can use their water again, or how long until people can go back home again? Anticipate those questions and try to have some answers prepared for those questions, especially the tough questions. Develop key messages and talking points. This is what you're going to say. This is the objective that we talked about earlier. This is how you meet that objective, through your key messages and talking points. We're going to talk more about this in a minute, so I'm not going to belabor that here. Practice or prepare the spokesperson or yourself. If you're the PIO, a lot of times you might be helping your director or another subject matter expert in your office provide that interview, and you can help prepare them as well. You can pretend to be the reporter, or you can do this to yourself in a mirror. Pretend that you're the reporter and ask yourself the question and answer that question back and forth, and have that discussion with yourself. And before I forget to mention this, something that helps me too, and I should have added this to the tips and tricks slide at the very bottom at the end of the presentation, is it's just a conversation. We're just having a conversation, two people. Yeah, they're asking a lot of questions and I'm providing a lot of answers, but this is just a two-way conversation. That's why I like to think about going into an interview. But practice that conversation with yourself in a mirror, or if you're prepping a director or a spokesperson, practice that two-way conversation with them. Ask them the questions, let them answer. And finally, update your facts. Right before that interview occurs, especially in a breaking news situation, disaster, an incident, have all the latest information before you go do that interview. Check in with the incident commander, check in with your director or public officials or whoever has that information. Go make sure you have all the latest information before you start that interview. And I'll just pause, for questions, but okay.
Hey, Wade, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you talked about prepping for the interview. What happens if you do not want to do the interview after learning about it?
Okay, so good question. So let's say, yeah, you've been asked or contacted by somebody in the media who wants to do an interview with you. You're probably they're gonna ask you or tell you the topic. What do you want to talk about? And you don't want to do it. Maybe you don't want to talk about that topic. Maybe you're not the right person. Maybe it's just not the right time yet. What do you do if you don't want to do that interview? So yeah, there's a few things you can maybe, to address those concerns, schedule it for a later time. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about that, but we're just not ready yet. We don't have any information right now. Personally, I would say, do the interview if at all possible. You want to be the face, you want to have that opportunity to represent your agency. even if it's going to be very short and you don't have a lot to say. Um, Otherwise, if you don't want to do it, maybe there's someone else in your agency that's more a subject matter expert that you can coordinate with them and help them and see if they're available to provide that interview. So I would encourage you to try to accept to do those news interviews as much as possible, but there are ways to either kind of reschedule or find somebody else, or just say we're not ready to talk about that yet. Let me get back with you. If it's not a breaking news story, that might be acceptable. If they're just working on some, long-term something happening over a long period, it might be able to say, can I just reschedule that with you later?
Good point.
Question there. So our key messages and talking points. Typically, you want to prepare 3 key messages because and it's okay when you're doing an interview, by the way, to have notes. Have notes in hand. You can refer to your notes, especially in a complex, overwhelming situation, a lot of information flowing, a lot of details. Have notes with you. But having your 3 key messages, makes it easy to remember those 3. What are the 3 key messages? And then 2 or 3 talking points for each of those 3 key messages. Keep them short, easy to understand, statements that reinforce your key message. So your key message is going to be a higher level point that you want to make, and then the talking points support that higher level key message. Brief 1 or 2 sentence answers to basic questions that might be asked about those key messages, and memorable statements that support the key message. Again, sound bites. So you could even have that basically written out, and then you're going to maybe not have them memorized, but you can paraphrase what those talking points are, and again, keeping them concise and complete, memorable sound bites, and interesting enough to quote. That's what gets that information in the paper or on the television or the radio. Is it's good information that's interesting. It meets all the criteria for newsworthy information. It's timely, factual. It's in the location. Can't remember the other word there. Human interest. So what is making this newsworthy? So a couple of samples of some key messages and talking points. For number 1, here's my key message. I'm going to be going out there and talking about preparedness. This is National Preparedness Month, and this reporter wants to come and talk to my local emergency management office about preparedness for National Preparedness Month. My key message is, we want to help create a culture of preparedness wherever we are. That's my key message. Create a culture of preparedness. We think and drink and eat and breathe and sleep preparedness all the time. So what's a talking point to support that key message of creating a culture of preparedness? So part of creating a culture of preparedness includes making a family disaster plan or a work plan. That was interesting. The rest of them came all on up at once. What's that? So build a disaster supply kit for home or work could be a talking point for that key message of creating a culture of preparedness. Another key message is to be a different incident. So we've got some advance warning that some threat or dangers coming our way. The extreme high winds, the downslope winds off the Wasatch Fault. Be ready for expected extreme high winds. We know that they're going to happen tonight, tomorrow night, and they can be extremely damaging. So what's a talking point? That's secure your items outside. Make sure you've got everything tied down or put away. Prepare for power outages. These high winds most likely will knock power out. So there's a key message. Be ready for the extreme high winds and the damage, and talking points to support that. Secure your items outside, prepare for power outages. The third one, your local emergency management needs volunteers. So this could be, again, a National Preparedness Month interview, or anything, just a kind of an average after a county council or city council meeting type of a discussion. Yes, your local emergency management needs volunteers. We need volunteers to help in some of our planning and training and exercise and preparedness and mitigation efforts. So yes, our talking points help support the preparedness and mitigation efforts in the county. Go to register at twillaresponse.gov. Um, so your key messages are the high level, more broad statements, and your talking points are some of the more details. Answer the who, what, why, when, where, when, hows, or whatever to support that upper level key message. And having three of them, these are three different examples for three different incidents, but your key messages would be the same, would all support the same thing. So for an example of an incident, I'll give you one that actually happened at a Deseret Chemical Depot. They had a release of agent out of the smokestack. So our key messages were, um, we have confidence in the Army in taking care of it and doing these things safely. They and then a talking point is they have engineering devices in place and filters and sensors and everything else. And so we have confidence in the Army. Our second key message was uh, the there's no threat to the public. That's another important key message, and maybe that should have been the first one. But there's no threat to the public this time, and the talking points were the amount of agent that was released through the smokestack was so minute that it's already dissipated and evaporated in air, and it couldn't travel anyplace. So there's no threat to the public was a key message, and then details on how do we know that. And then the third one is, we plan and prepare and train and exercise for events just like this. And so we've trained our public, we have our warning systems in place and we've notified everybody. So those are three key messages that would support one incident. So that's these are different incidents just for different examples, but you would all want those three key messages to relate to the incident or the interview that they're calling about.
Hey, Wade, before you move on to the hands-on, Will Lusk asks, is there really such a thing as off the record, or is it just TV show lingo?
Good question. Good question. Is there anything off the record? And I would treat that answer as a no. No, there isn't. If you're talking to the reporter, anything you say could be, as they say in a court of law in the reading your Miranda rights. Anything you say to a reporter, pretty much they could use, even if they agreed not to, they may not remember that agreement. It may just slip out when they're doing their stand-up, yes, or writing their story or whatever. You just have to be careful about off the record. Yeah, I'd be very careful about that, and treat everything as if it's on the record. That's just the safest way to do it. Yeah, good question. Thank you. All right, so preparing for your interview, what's one of the things that we could do here today, a hands-on activity, is to write your key messages and 2 talking points. So write or draft or prepare or create, however you look at it. You're coming up with your key messages and talking points. So for this activity, I put down two key messages, maybe in the interest of time, and 2 talking points. So here's a scenario that you're going to come up with 2 key messages and 2 talking points for your jurisdiction. So a tornado rips through your jurisdiction, damaging public infrastructure, including the power. The power's out. The interview is within the first 30 minutes of the incident. So in the first 30 minutes of the incident, what is your objective? What is your objective? Who's your audience? And let's say that this is, and really your key messages and talking points will be the same no matter what the medium is. It doesn't matter if it's newspaper, TV, or radio, or social. Your key messages and talking points will be the same. So it doesn't matter if it's a TV interview. So, but you've got the media, the TV. They're out there in front of your EOC, and you're going to be making providing an interview within the next 30 minutes, within the 30 minutes after this incident. Think about this for a second. What are your objectives and what key messages would help you get that objective accomplished? And then write a couple of talking points to support those two key messages. You can do 3 if you want. If you want to be an overachiever, I'll let you. We'll take like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask some questions. And Jeff, I do have a couple of slides after this too, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, if people want to drop their responses in the chat, that would be amazing too.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to just copy and paste a very brief key message and a couple talking points in the chat window, that'd be great. So we could maybe take a look at some of those.
So while we're waiting, Chris Rep put in the chat that we still offer the G290 and the G291. EMI just won't be updating the curriculum.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I cannot see the slide, the chat window. All I can see is the slide. I don't know if there's a different screen I should be opening up to see that, but.
Hey, Wade. Tracy just put in the chat. She says, Wade, you mentioned leading the interview and taking control of the objectives of the interview. Is there a go-to phrase you use to insist that you will not be discussing something when a reporter tries to make you talk on camera about something that you don't want to talk about or you are not ready to talk about? I know practicing that phrase in advance will be key.
That's a really good question. Something that you'll not be discussing. Yeah. So there's some tips and tricks that I'm going to talk about after this that kind of goes into that a little bit. I'll say what not to say first. Don't say no comment. That's not a phrase you ever want to use. No comment. That just sounds like you're guilty. That sounds like you're avoiding something or whatever. But there's bridging techniques. So you can answer a question. So this is leading into the interview. Yeah, you can just maybe there's not a specific phrase, but you can say, hey, I don't have any information about that. Don't ask me about that. I can't talk about that. It's okay to just have that discussion with the reporter in advance. I don't know if there's a key phrase that you would use there, but just maybe make sure that there's an understanding and agreement. And that's not to say, and I've seen this done before where they agreed not to talk about that, and then they came into the interview and that's all they talked about. And in which case, yeah, you can end the interview at that point if you choose to. You can, again, like I say, we'll talk about these tips and tricks. You can try to bring it back to what you thought you were going to be talking about through bridging techniques. I'll bring up some of those things here in just a minute, but
Are you looking at the chat?
yeah, I figured out how to pull that up. I don't know if you can still see can you still see the slide too? Okay.
Yeah, you're good. I was just gonna read what Sheila wrote, but I'll let you if you want.
Okay, yeah, that's probably been a couple minutes there. So everybody, if you want to wrap up that activity, if you've got a couple key messages and talking points that you're willing to share with us, go ahead, Jeff, if you want to read Sheila's comment.
Yeah, Sheila wrote, some key points should include evacuations, if so, where, rally points, and road closures.
Okay, right. So maybe her key message would be talking, it sounds like it's about evacuations. You want to evacuate the area. So your talking points to support that evacuation order, or maybe that's the key message. There's an evacuation order in place. Please stay out of the area, allow the first responders to come in. So your talking points would be, if you have to evacuate, the shelters are open up here. The roads are closed, you can't get in. So those are great. Those are some great talking points to support an evacuation order key message. Yeah, well done, Sheila. Anybody else have any others that you would like to share with us? If you want to just bring up your mic, even if anyone else wrote a key message and a talking point you'd like to share.
Wade, this is Tracy.
Yeah, go
I would
ahead.
I would add just that we are assessing the damage right now. There's still potential for storms in the area. Please stay safe, and please don't try to come into the area while our responders are trying to assess damage and locate survivors and victims. It's an active scene that we're trying to work right now, and that we would appreciate all the traffic from areas around avoiding the area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done, Tracy. Again, a good example there. So your key message then would have probably been something along the lines of, yes, this is what our responders, we have responders on scene that are doing the best they can to provide aid. That's what's our key message out of that is here's what we're doing. And then you provided a lot of great talking points to support that key message. Yes, very good. Anyone else have one to share?
With this being, first off, as a hands-on, is this during the night? Is this during the day? When did the tornado hit? So one of the things you talk about is you bring up the infrastructure to include power. So one of the key messages is we're working on, notifying you when the power will be back on. Other than that, kind of, put in some advice of how to deal with that power being out and how long that is going on. And, especially with young children or whatnot. Like I say, it's depending on the time of day, how important that is.
Okay, very good, Jeff. That's also a great key message would be the power's out. We don't know how long it'll take to get back on. Some of that talking points, as you just mentioned, is how do we respond to that? How do we be prepared? So that's a great one as well. Great talking point, a great key message and supporting talking points right there. Thank you. All right, unless there's anybody else that wants to share, I'll move on here to my final slides. Anyone? Last call? Okay, very well done. All of you that shared those with us, Sheila, Tracy, Jeff, great examples there. Great job. Let's see, now my slides are not advancing. Maybe I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. Okay, there we go. So you should be able to see interview tips and tricks. Is that right? Jeff?
Yep. Yeah, that's what you got.
Okay, cool. All right, so here are some interview tips and tricks to try to remember in going into an interview. After those basics that we just talked about of your objective and your audience and your message and your 3 key messages and talking points, those are some really important basics. Here's a few other tips and tricks to try to remember to just help make that interview even more successful. So it's a good idea to restate the question in your answer. So they may ask a question. I should have an example in my mind, but I don't. But basically, what they might have asked, what was the cause of the incident? Well, you should say, don't just answer that by saying, an explosion. You just say, oh, the cause of this incident was an explosion, or we think, or we know, or we're still investigating the cause of the incident at this time. So restate the question as part of your answer. That way, it's harder to take that out of context. The audience knows exactly what you're referring to. So restate the question in your answer. Answer the question you wish you were asked. And this kind of goes back to along the lines of the question, maybe it was that Tracy asked about not wanting to do that interview, or maybe answer a specific question. You answer the question that you wished you were asked. It's kind of like avoiding it, if you will, but it's a technique that the PIOs and spokespersons use called bridging. They might ask, why were you guys not better prepared to respond to this type of situation? Well, obviously we don't want to answer that's a tough question to answer. Well, we're looking into our response right now, but what the important thing to remember is, we want the public to take these steps, to go to higher ground now, so you bridge by saying what we want the public to know is, or what the important thing to remember is, or so is a phrase to use to bridge from the question that they asked you to the answer that you want to give. So it's a little trick right there. They may restate their question because they realize they didn't get the answer they were looking for. Just bridge again. And what do you bridge to? You bridge to your key messages and talking points. What are those 3 key messages? Sorry, I've got a little bit of a scratchy throat. What are those 3 key messages and talking points that maybe you haven't had a chance to bring up yet in the interview? Maybe they haven't asked you these questions yet. Bridge over to your 3 key messages and talking points. Well, the important thing to remember is, or, well, what the public really wants to know at this time is, or, just there are some bridging techniques, bridging phrases to use to answer the question that you wish you had been asked. As I mentioned earlier, never say no comment. That sounds like an admission of guilt. It's better to say, I don't know. It's better to say, well, we don't have the answer to that question yet, but we're looking into it. I don't know the answer, but as soon as we find out, I will come back and let you guys know. So it's better to say, I don't know, or we're looking into that, or we don't have that information yet, rather than no comment. And if you do say, we'll come back, we'll provide that as soon as possible, if you make that promise to answer a question, keep that promise. Make sure you show up, you call them, include it in a news release, whatever way you're going to provide that information that you recently acquired. Make sure you follow up with that promise. Know what you can say and what you can't say in an interview. Releasable information that's been cleared by the emergency manager, that's been cleared by incident command, that's already included in a news release, that's already been in a reviewed and approved news release. Information that's on status board, public facing status boards on websites and so on. Know what you can say and know what you can't say. Is there information that's not releasable yet? Is there information that will foul up the investigation? Is common for law enforcement and so on. What is the information that you can say? Make sure you know that as well. And don't provide that information. Bridge back again to your 3 key messages and talking points if you get asked that question. Bridge back to what you can say. Stay in your lane. This is one that's kind of in a large scale incident with a lot of agencies, a lot of responders. It's easy to kind of start straying outside of your area of expertise, start straying outside of your agency's responsibilities. And it's easy to maybe even, and this is actually a different trick too, or tip, but to not speculate, but to stay in your lane, stay within your area of responsibility and your jurisdiction and the information that you have that's releasable and that you know of. And the other part that I was adding to that again was, avoid speculation. They may ask what if questions. Well, what if this had happened? Or what if it had been worse? Or what if, don't answer the what if questions. Avoid speculation. Stick to the facts. Stick to what you know that's releasable, that you can say. And again, well, that's not important right now. Is what's important is, the people go to the shelters. What's important is that people boil their water. Go back to your key messages and talking points. Don't speculate the what if questions. Speak loudly and confidently. Have authority. You are an agent of your organization and department. You are an approved spokesperson, a subject matter expert. Speak loudly, confidently, with authority. Make eye contact with the reporter. Nonverbal language says a lot in our communication. Are we looking elsewhere? It's okay to look down at your notes. As I mentioned, it's okay to have notes in hand. Look down at your notes, but glance back, and look back up at the reporter. Depending on the type of interview, you don't usually look into the camera itself. You just ignore the camera. And as I said earlier, just having a two-way conversation with this person standing in front of you and make eye contact with them. If it's a studio interview where they've just sent out a photographer, there's no reporter, and this is a live studio interview, that might be the time when you are looking into the camera. They've got you on a screen in a box next to another box with the anchor. And that's one time that you would look into the camera, but you just treat it like you're talking to another person. Stand and sit tall. Have good posture, no slouching. Again, have that authority with you. Keep your hands in front of you or at your sides. If you just want to keep your arms down, but occasionally what do I do with my hands in an interview? It's okay to just have those out there in front of you. Slight motions. You don't want to get really animated. Sometimes I feel like I might get too animated when I'm doing interviews or speaking, but just have that, out there in front of you, palms forward. You can trust me. I know what I'm talking about. I am an authority on this situation. Avoid the hand. A lot of times we want to like to stand with our hands clasped behind our backs. It's comfortable, but that's a handcuff behind the back look. You want to avoid that. You want to avoid the fig leaf pose with your hands down in front of your crotch. Just don't want to have those poses. And then lastly, if you've got a way to record the interview yourself, it's a good idea to record that interview. You've got a record of what was asked and what you said in response. A lot of times it may not be conveyed that way in the newspaper or on the TV or radio, but you go to your bosses, the elected officials, and say, oh, they took that out of context. They misquoted me. Here's what I said. It's right here on this recording. Our phones all basically have a voice memo. You can just use your voice memo app on your phone. If you've got a tape recorder or whatever, the old technology, whatever you use, it's fine. If you want to set up your own camera and record that. But it's good to record the interview yourself and have a record of it. So that brings me to our conclusion here. So again, are there any other questions?
Hey, so Ember, I hope I said that correctly. She was talking about, I'm gonna just kind of paraphrase. She goes, with politicians, they only answer the questions they want to answer and not the ones they don't. Don't answer the ones they don't. Her point being, give sound bites to keep them on the topic that you want to talk about. And she ends with control the message, answer like a politician. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Stick to your talking points, as she mentioned there. Only give them the sound bites that you want to talk about. Your talking points, your key messages and talking points. And I think someone else earlier I noticed after I came back over here, this was in the question about off the record. Tracy mentioned something about reporters' integrity would be called into question, but there's no way to take it back once they broadcast your words, right? So that would support, don't, treat nothing off the record. Pretty much everything is on the record, but just be careful with that reporter in the future if that ever happened to you, right? Any other questions? Jeff, or do you have any other questions there?
Yeah, as you were going through, just a couple of, if you do as a reporter, if you're up there, and you make a mistake in your story, how do you go about correcting that?
Okay, so yeah, you can, two things. First of all, you want to assess the severity of the misinformation or the misquote. How bad is it? Does it justify correction, or is it something that it's not going to be they got my title wrong or spelled my name wrong, or is it a date and time thing that nobody's going to show up because they had the wrong date or the wrong time? So assess the severity of the misinformation first of all, see if it really justifies a correction, and then reach out to that reporter. And I've done this before. Hey, you had the website address wrong in that article, and it's going to be online. Can you correct and make sure we have the right website address in the article when it's on the story's online? Or hey, that you've got the wrong streets. There's a lot of information that in emergency management situations, if it's misinformation, you probably need to make sure that gets corrected. You can do that with a news release, or you can call it, if it was an interview, I would just call back that interview or call back that reporter and say, hey, that's wrong information. I'd like to come and talk to you again and get this corrected, whether it's live or they're going to use that soundbite again. you can reach out to that reporter and make sure that they're getting the correct information out there. Yeah, good question. Any others?
Does anybody else have any questions for Wade? Any comments?
Maybe one last point here too. I'm seeing a lot of people here from the Division of Emergency Management. And, sometimes the question might be, who can do an interview? Who can do an interview for our agency, whether it's DEM or anyone else's agency? And that's kind of up to the upper management. And is there a policy in place? Is there a PIO for that agency? Is there an identified spokesperson already? Are there subject matter experts within the agency that can answer the questions and provide the information better than the PIO or the communications director or something like that? So I would say if you're contacted by a reporter to do an interview, for example, I was contacted this morning by Jamie Huff. She's got a reporter that called about a topic on the flood maps that she's been working on and said, "Is it all right if I do that interview?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns about it." Ask the reporter if they can send you a link, because we like to keep a record of all these interviews and all the stories that are done about DEM. So provide me a link to that story when it airs or when it's on the website or internet or whatever. But check first. It's great to just check with me as the PIO and DEM, or with your manager, bureau chief or whatever. Make sure you've got that support to do that interview. And a lot of times, if I get a request from a reporter to do an interview, if we have a subject matter expert on that topic, I would gladly help set that up for our subject matter expert. Our earthquake program, flood insurance, flood map, flood risk, our operations, even our training and our the exercises we do. We've got a lot of subject matter experts within the agency that I would gladly help set up an interview with one of those people. If you didn't want to do it, I'd be happy to do it for you. If you could just make sure that I was provided the information. So I guess, any other questions? Anything else?
Well, that's a good point. Good information, Wade. One last call out for any comments, questions? Okay, well, thanks, Wade, for your presentation today. Like I said, it's good information. As a reminder, this webinar and all other webinars in this series will be available on the DEM website at dem.utah.gov/exercises, or now at dem.utah.gov. I wonder. Our webinar next week will be a presentation from Kathy Holder and Max Johnson from our mitigation team. If you have any I Wonder topic suggestions, please reach out to tbodley at utah.gov to have your topic added to our calendar. We're always excited to help you explore and get to know all that DEM can offer the emergency management community. So until next time, keep wondering.